Thank you for joining us today and for your interest in the project centered on the cultural heritage of Croatian immigrants in the United States. The project, entitled From Pittsburgh with Love, the Library Heritage of Croatian Immigrants, is the result of cooperation between the National and the University Library in Zagreb and the Croatian Fraternal Union from Pittsburgh. I'm Tamara Štefanac from the National and University Library in Zagreb, Croatia, and I'm very happy to be able to present part of this project today for all of you joining us online. So I will start a little bit about the project From Pittsburgh with Love, music and written heritage of Croatian immigrants, and then my colleagues Sanda Milošević and Tanja Mihalić will continue with specific details of the project. For those of you joining us online who have not yet been in the Zagreb in person, you can find us in the library at the address of the Croatian Fraternal Union Street number 4. So this is not a coincidence. It symbolized the contribution of the Croatian Fraternal Union to the Republic of Croatia. We carried most of project activities in 2024, and thanks to the support of the Central State Office for Croats Abroad. That support enabled us to conduct fieldwork in Pittsburgh, which provided to be a decisive moment in the project. So at the center of our interest was written, printed, and musical material preserved by Croatian Fraternal Union in Pittsburgh. We were guided by the ideas set out in the National Plan for the Development of Relations between the Republic of Croatia and Croats Abroad until 2027, in that plan, the cultural cooperation is recognized as an opportunity to strengthen the quality of relations and connectedness between Croats in the United States and the Croats from the Republic of Croatia. This project was basically fundamentally rooted in the affirmation of immigrant and diaspora cultural heritage and its contributions to the Croatian national culture, as well as in supporting the preservation, protection, and accessibility of materials throughout digitization. We also wish to influence public perception in Croatia regarding the importance of preserving the library heritage of Croatian immigrants and its rightful place within the national cultural expressions. The library heritage, as we see it in Croatia, of Croatian immigrants and Croatian diaspora is integral part of the library heritage of the Croatian people. I think that most of you are familiar with the Croatian Fraternal Union and its value for the Croats Abroad, but just in short notice, that is the most important, one of the most important organization of Croatian immigrants in the United States. The Croatian Fraternal Union was founded in 1894 in Allegheny City. Today that's part of Pittsburgh. And nowadays, throughout its lodges, the organization operates across the United States and Canada and has approximately 90,000 members. For decades, its central location in Pittsburgh has collected items of Croatian cultural heritage, but since 2003, so that's 23 years ago. Nowadays, the Croatian Fraternal Union has housed its own museum, which is entitled Bernard Luketic Croatian Cultural Museum. In addition to museum artifacts, they actively collected library and musical materials stored in their musical library, which my colleague Tanja Mihalić will discuss in more detail a bit later. Written and printed materials were initially collected as essential resources for information, communication, and learning, but over time, their preservation became a means of safeguarding the cultural expressions of Croatian immigrants. Publishing and printing thus became an important form of cultural expression. Aspects of preservation, protection, and scholarly study of originals are extremely important and will be further elaborated by my colleague Sanda Milošević from the perspective of conservation and restoration. From its earliest days, the Croatian Fraternal Union has published its own newspapers, whose informational role extended far beyond the organization itself. It began with Danica, followed by Napredak, and ultimately Zajedničar, which is still published today, and we can see it in their museum, both LED metrics for printing and items of newspapers. Of course, once in the past, newspapers served as the primary mean of information and communication, especially before the other media took over its roles. But today, this kind of material are irreplaceable resource for researchers. They are preserved in libraries and archives at various locations, and Zajedničar and other newspapers printed by Croatian emigrants abroad are systematically collected by the National and University Library in Zagreb, Croatia. So if you visit us, you will be able to research in the so-called Foreign Croatica collection. The National and University Library systematically develops the Foreign Croatica collection, which is in accordance with our Croatian Library and Library Activities Act, which recognize the library heritage of Croats outside the Republic of Croatia as part of national culture. The Foreign Croatica collection is located on the first floor of the library here in Zagreb, and it contains works by Croatian authors published abroad, works by foreign authors whose topic relates to Croatia and Croats, emigrant periodicals, some would call it ethnic press, and others publication of Croatian minorities and Croats outside Croatia. Thus, we also preserve issues of Danica, first Croatian Fraternal Union newspapers, though unfortunately we don't have preserved the complete set. Some issues are missing, but we still continue to collect and try to find other items that are missing, of course. But it's also important to highlight that over the course of history, many notable Croats from the United States have deposited their personal papers here in the library in the Zagreb. So such as George Prpić, Ivan Lupis Vukić, Bogdan Radica, Adam Eterović, Ivo Vučićević, and many others. And by doing that, they contributed significantly to research of the history and importance of Croatian diaspora. Their collections, their legacies are the unique sources of information. So given our role as a national library, our wish, whenever possible, is to acquire original books, newspapers, or other materials and include them in collection. However, Foreign Croatica collection and our other collections are also being developed digitally. So our visit to Pittsburgh aimed to identify materials suitable for digitization and for inclusion to our digital library, thereby ensuring broad open access, availability, and possibility for researchers around the globe to access these materials. So in other words, what has not been collected and preserved here in Zagreb, we looked for that material in Pittsburgh in Croatian Fraternal Union. The Croatian Fraternal Union Library is located in the organization's main building in Pittsburgh. I think it's very important to note here that the Croatian Fraternal Union was registered and still is as an insurance society, so insurance company, an association of members for the purpose of mutual insurance. And by the collection of museum artifacts, sheet music, and library material was not planned activity. that happened as a spontaneous expression of the organization's connection with wider community. By recognizing the Croatian Fraternal Union as a stable organization with historical continuity, its members sent materials over the years, which they preserved, and since 2003, they presented it in the museum. The items they collected are often personalized. We examine them in detail, focusing on materials that are not held in our collections in Zagreb. We recorded information specific to each individual copy, such, for example, ex libris, previous owners, donors, marginalia, and all details of binding and printing. One specific goal of examining the materials was to create a list of items proposed for digitization based on predefined criteria. So when establishing criteria for digitization priority, we considered various ways of assessing value. Alongside institutional value, meaning the value for us in the Zagreb library, we included heritage value, informational value, and general cultural value, but also we considered potential value for the Croatian Fraternal Union itself and for the American Croatian community. Alongside that, we consider the emotional value, especially regarding unique copies, for example, of family members of a person who donated some item, right? From roughly 5,000 reviewed titles, 94 items met the criteria and were identified as desirable for digitization in future project activities. I would just now like to lay out some details about Croatian printing in Pittsburgh and briefly mention two Croatian emigrants that were involved in creating Croatian printing businesses in Pittsburgh. First is Josip Marohnić, who established the first Croatian bookstore and printing house in Pittsburgh. Alongside him, his friend and also member of the Croatian Fraternal Union was Jure Skrivanić. And both of them were members of the union. They held various positions within the organizations over the years. And we were particularly interested in their publishing and printing activities, in addition to the works they created as authors, of course, or editors. So born in Hrelin, Josip Marohnić was trained printer and bookbinder, even before he went to United States. But when arriving to United States, he worked as a typesetter in Chicago before coming to Pittsburgh. He founded his first Croatian bookstore and printing house in 1899 in Allegheny, which was incorporated into Pittsburgh in 1907. In his printing house, he republished editions from Croatia. For example, from the Stjepan Kugli bookstore in Zagreb. He republished many works, but he printed his own works as well as practical publications in Croatian language intended for immigrants, such as dictionaries, calendars, and manuals for learning both Croatian and English. So learning English for older generations coming to Pittsburgh and learning Croatian for children that were already born as a second generation in Pittsburgh. At the Croatian Fraternal Union, we found several publications from first Croatian bookstore and printing house that we had previously, we haven't been able to acquire because they are just not available on the market for buying. So we put them on the list of the works whose existence had not previously been known to exist at all. Of course, they are on the priority list for digitization. We also found works that were published in Croatia, but reprinted and rebound in his bookstore that completely differ from Croatian editions in several aspects, especially in physical features, making first-hand examination essential. That's why being in the and doing field work in Pittsburgh was extremely important, because these are the details that we were just wouldn't be able to notice without having the material in hand. And Josip Marošnik, because he was professional printer, that influenced every aspect of his successful businesses. What I want to say, in Chicago at that same time when Marošnik acted in Pittsburgh, in Chicago, Hinko Sirovatka, he edited the newspapers Hrvatska Zastava, and Hinko Sirovatka noted as early as 1904 that his newspapers were filled with errors because the printing house was owned by a Czech immigrant. Typesetters didn't know Croatian very well, so they used Czech letters. So this situation could influence further examination of linguistic features. But it's not about the linguistic history of Croatian language in diaspora. It's just about availability of letters needed to have the correct typeset, right? So such information is invaluable to today's researchers of language history and provides context essential to understanding Croatian publishing in the United States. The second Croatian printing house in Pittsburgh was owned by Jure Skrivanić, originally from Dubrovnik. He launched his newspapers entitled Napredak in Hoboken, New Jersey, across the Manhattan in New York, in 1891. And then he moved with his family and business to Allegheny, where he continued publishing Napredak as a temporary newspapers of the Croatian Fraternal Union from 1896 to 1904. The building that housed his Napredak printing house still stands in Pittsburgh nowadays. We can see here in the right photo how it looks today, and on the left it's just a detail from the newspapers at the beginning of the 20th century, how the building looked at that time when Jure Skrivanić had his business downstairs, and he lived with his family on the first floor. Later, Skrivanić moved to Seattle after business difficulties, taking all his written and printed materials with him. And after his death, his family sold all this material, his legacy, to the University of Seattle, to the library. I hope to be able to find some issues of Napredak in Pittsburgh, as the newspapers were censored and banned in Croatia at the end of 19th century. Skrivanić actually wrote a letter, and he complained to the Croatian government at the time, protesting, he said, the withdrawal of postal privileges to the lands of the crown of Saint Stephen, meaning to the Croatia, Slavonia, and Dalmatia at that time. But his newspapers were still under restrictions. That means that the library in Zagreb at the time was not able to collect it because they were censored in Croatia and were not able even to reach within the borders of Croatian countries at the end of the 19th and beginning of 20th century. Distribution of certain works from Marošnik printing house was also banned, especially during the World War I. Such bans on importing Croatian publications were often the reason the library in Zagreb could not collect them. So we assume that these editions remain preserved somewhere in the United States or beyond, because subscriber to these titles, to these newspapers, lived worldwide. Ivan Čizmić, author of the book on the history of the Croatian Fraternal Union, notes that there were 3,000 Croatian associations in the United States and around 200 Croatian language-based newspapers and journals. In addition to that, Croatian parishes, Catholic parishes, they preserve exceptional library and archival treasures, including publications that would otherwise have been lost. So throughout this project, we found not only library heritage items missing from our collections in Zagreb, materials that we still hope to be able to preserve in digital form, but also we found information on works previously unknown to us completely. We found information on Croatian authors, and, which is also very important, we were able to find out more about relationships of American Croats that they had with their heritage, and still nowadays they have it, as well as on the families and individuals who carefully preserved the books they had brought from their homeland and those that they used in their new lives, and ultimately donating them to the Croatian Fraternal Union for permanent preservation. Thank you for your attention. I will give the floor to my colleague Sanda Milošević from the National and University Library of Zagreb, also a team member in this project.
Thank you, Tamara. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Sanda Milošević, and I'm pleased to share a few points about this project from the perspective of a conservator. My primary goal as a conservator was to assess the physical condition of the library materials and developing professional recommendations for their preservation in the existing conditions, as well as protection measures prior to digitization. Conservation work in projects of this kind operates on several levels. It requires an examination of the storage environment, the current condition of the materials, the risks that threaten their preservation, and definition of protection measures, both preventive measures and treatments that precede digitization. In such process, the conservator serves as a necessary link between the library profession and the technical aspects of preservation. The conservator determines what can or cannot be used and under which conditions. The materials preserved at the CFU within the corpus of foreign Croatica represent an authentic record of the cultural creativity and identity of Croatian communities worldwide. And of course, they hold exceptional historical and cultural value. As you have already heard, the collection is situated in the Croatian Cultural Museum Bernard Luketic in several rooms, functioning as a combination of exhibition space and storage. Unlike many typical field situations, where conservators often encounter inadequate spaces, humidity issues, improvised shelving, temporarily stored materials, and improper handling, the CFU presented conditions that can be described as above expectations, which is every conservator's dream, as one can immediately focus on the materials. In short, the space is dry, clean, and exhibits stable microclimatic conditions. Books are stored on wooden shelves, newspapers are placed horizontally in cabinets due to their format, and older materials are separated into drawer units. As in many smaller museum collections, there are some typical challenges that arise from the desire to present continuity and diversity of activity through a wide range of formats. For example, books, newspapers, photographs, textiles, instruments, and various other materials. Such approach naturally carries certain risks, since some items remain on display longer than would be recommended from a conservator's perspective, or are presented in ways that place stress on the material. In these situations, materials may experience strain, for example, due to light exposure, shelving position, or display angle, as well as from frequent handling. As you will see from the examples, the library materials are diverse. After examinations, the materials and their condition can be grouped into several types, with corresponding damages that need to be addressed, particularly before planning and conducting digitization. So we can see range from thin brochures and simple pamphlet bindings that are stapled or sewn with thread to hardbound volumes with cardboard, cloth, or even leather covers. Many titles from the late 19th and early 20th century in paper covers show damaged bindings, brittle paper along the edges, and the book spine area, as seen on these examples. In hardbound volumes, common damages include mechanical wear of the covers, faded front covers, deformations of the book block, complete loss of the book spine, or separation of the book block from the covers. Again, these are the results of use and stress on the front cover. Many items retain their original covers and typography, which makes them valuable documents of the printing, aesthetic, and technical practices of the place and period in which they were produced. Newspapers and non-book printed materials are particularly vulnerable due to the low quality of newsprint, as it becomes brittle and darkens over the time. The edges are often torn, especially the first few pages that are most exposed to handling and therefore suffer the most damage and loss of content. Some items show traces of moisture, staining, or damage to the binding. During field assessments, we often encounter various types of adhesive tape used as repairs. This is never recommended, as the adhesive absorbs into the paper fibers over time, causing discoloration and increased brittleness. Although such methods are not advisable, in some cases, these improvised interventions have temporarily preserved or even prevented the loss of the material. During the assessment, several minor preventive measures were implemented to reduce mechanical stress and prevent possible damage. Since conservation work includes not only describing the existing condition and planning or performing conservation treatments, but also recommending sustainable preventive measures that slow down the deterioration over the long term. For all these reasons, despite the relatively good condition of the materials, it was important to examine the materials in person in order to document the physical condition and identify the causes and types of deterioration, all steps that are essential for planning digitization. In practice, it is very rare for materials to be immediately ready for digitization. An in-person assessment almost always reveals damages that require at least minimal stabilization of the materials. Here we can see a good example of book materials that appear to be simple, like one folded page, but they also need to be carefully unfolded and flattened. Library materials, such as these examples, are fragile and frequently used, which is why each item must be inspected before scanning. Preparation may include surface cleaning to remove the dust and dirt, flattening of pages, sometimes only at the edges, sometimes the entire sheet, especially with fragile newspapers, as this example on the left. Stabilizing the binding, reinforcing the joints between the book block and the covers, removing adhesive tapes, metal staplers, or reinforcing torn edges. Therefore, every digitization process involving historical materials should begin with conservator assessment and preparation, not with technical imaging. Digitizing this type of material requires specialized scanners fully adapt to the format and needs of the materials. This includes considerations regarding the dimensions of the materials. For example, the newspapers, as seen in the example presented by colleague Štefanac, large format or the changing formats of the newspaper like this shown here on the left, Znanje, as well as scanners that are able to scan books that can be open only between 90 and 120 degrees without causing mechanical stress to the spine. A useful solution that would be for this prayer book shown on the right. Alongside scanner type, careful handling of each item during digitization is essential. Digitization enhances accessibility and reduces the need for physical handling of the original materials. However, the originals must first be adequately stabilized. For this reason, conservators should be directly involved in planning digitization processes. When materials are properly prepared and accurately captured, digitized surrogates serve as durable record of cultural heritage that transcends geographical boundaries. In conclusion, the conservation aspect of the project demonstrated how an interdisciplinary approach can be successfully applied in practice. It is especially important to emphasize that the in-person assessment of materials is irreplaceable. No photograph, list, or written description can substitute for the conservator's ability to evaluate the space as well as the microclimatic condition, the smell of the room, the housing of materials, the paper structure, the tensions of the binding, or the fragility of the edges. This direct contact enables a professional assessment and prevents damage that may occur during later handling. In this context, digitization should not be viewed as a purely technical procedure, but as a process that begins with conservation preparation and ends with returning the original to a stable environment. The conservator is an essential participant in the preservation process, the one who understands the material, assesses risks, and safeguards authenticity so that the heritage remains accessible in the future, both in its original and in its digital form. By this, I conclude my presentation. The next presentation will be given by my colleague, Tanja Mihalić.
Thank you, Sanda. I'm Tanja Mihalić from the music collection of the National University Library in Zagreb. And the third part of this presentation deals with music, the part of the project that explored the musical material kept in the music library of the Croatian Fraternal Union. Since it is about music, I would like to begin this part with a short musical excerpt. Fragment. It's a solo song of Ivan Plemeniti Zajc, Domovini I ljubavi, Homeland and Love. we listened to a musical example published on an older Sheller gramophone record from the music collection of the National Library. Compositions are performed by the famous Croatian soprano Zinka Kunc-Milanov. The record was published by the American publisher Sonart and represents a valuable example of foreign Croatica musical material important for the history of musical heritage and the entirety of Croatian musical discography. This particular example represents one of the best examples for launching this collaborative project. Something about music collection of the National Library. It is a heritage collection, has a very large fund of Croatica musical material, over 35,000 of gramophone records, several hundred older Sheller gramophone records from the first half of the 20th century, but only a few editions published in the USA. For the purpose of identifying such musical material, selecting it is important for the entirety of Croatian musical heritage. In making recommendations for digitization, we visited the Croatian Fraternal Union and its music library. Croatian Fraternal Unity possesses an exceptionally large and rich music library. It is one of the largest collections of Croatian music outside the homeland of Croatia. The Croatian Fraternal Union possesses an exceptionally large and rich music library. It is one of the largest collections of Croatian music outside the homeland of Croatia, in which not only sound recordings are preserved, but also manuscript sheet music, newspapers, newspaper archive, and printed music material, and lots of other materials. Although it is the case that we mostly have book material in the National Library, it is not so with the music. Quite the opposite. As I said a few slides earlier, most of the musical material from the Fraternal Union collection is not in the National Library. This especially applies to shellac gramophone records that were recorded and published in the first half of the 20th century and on which were recorded compositions by Croatian authors, Croatian traditional music, and performances by Croatian emigrants to America, especially performances by various tamburica band formed and which Croatian immigrants participated. In addition to these elements, it should be noted that shellac gramophone records are rare today, were not collected as legal deposit copies, and are quite difficult to obtain. Precisely for this reason, material preserved in the Fraternal Union is exceptional in terms of its importance for Croatian musical culture, especially for the beginnings of discography in which musicians on the Croatian diaspora in the USA also played a significant role. Field work as part of the project was based on a reviewed list of gramophone records that members of the Croatian Fraternal Union submitted upon their arrival in the National Library in December 2023. The list consisted about 500 of units of material, and the objectives of the work including the identification of musical material of interest to the National Library. Their planned review included a review by title and edition, a review of the condition of the material in terms of possible damage, and lists recommendation according to priorities for the preservation and digitization of shellac gramophone records. The possibility is sending these physical copies to the National Library. Upon our arrival in October 2024, it was evident that the material was arranged according to the list submitted to the National Library in June 2024. It is located in 7 boxes whose contents corresponded to the list. But since this was just a plan, in addition to these 7 boxes, it turned out that the Fraternal Union has hundreds of duplicate records that are ready to send to the National Library. Some of these records are on the list from the 7 boxes already seen, but many of them were not on the list. So it was necessary to examine each record, search for identify the publishing number, matrix numbers, and put them on the list according to priority criteria. Here we see workbenches with duplicate records, and it was agreed that it could be sent because there were duplicates. The records do not have any specific order, and therefore searching, identifying, and comparing them with existing lists required a lot of time. The records are partly arranged according to artists, but there are also those that are arranged according to publishers or some other unspecified criteria. Then the process of reviewing and identifying the records with the existing list began. A total of about 500 records were reviewed, as well as additional records that were duplicates and that needed to be examined and selected. In addition to the titles, performers and publishers, metric numbers and publishing numbers were entered for each record that matched any of the Croatica material criteria. According to the existing situation, a selection was made in such a way that the Croatica material was separated and compared with the list obtained in Zagreb. Based on these criteria for publisher, performer, author, arranger of the records of interest to the National Library were separated and arranged and prepared for the possible transfer to the library. A proposal for digitization was made for the records that would remain in the library of the Croatian Fraternal Union. On selected records from the Croatica collection, 20 labels were identified, which recorded performers of Croatian origins. Most of the found labels are not in the National Library music collection. In terms of genre, the majority of releases are recordings of traditional music, kolos from various parts of Croatia, but there is also military music, marches, popular music, old town songs, chants, arias, and choirs. However, the largest part is tamburica music, where musical performances by individuals, ensembles, and choirs whose members are originally from Croatia are recorded. The repertoire, which mostly includes traditional music from Croatia, reveals that its performances was a mean of recognition, but also an important link in the musical and cultural circle of Croatian emigrants. This is supported by the fact that for 80 years, Duquesne University Tamburica has been operating at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, whose director for 2 decades was the Croatian emigrant Walter Kolar. The performances of Croatian traditional music were encouraged, which is why the library owns a large number of their performances. Along with that, many others which have been noted for developing and promoting tamburica music of the Croatian diaspora community. Analysis of songs and performers shows that already mentioned in the context of importance of collecting items which represent part of Croatian musical heritage, project activities resulted in priority lists of physical units of records for inclusion in a library of National Library collection, as well as a list of materials that could be digitized and then included in the National Croatian Digital Library. This is an example of a rehearsal from the Croatian home St. George at Coburg, where we attended a rehearsal of a children tamburica ensemble. The Croatian home is not only a place to play music, but also a place to socialize, maintain tradition, and strengthen ties among the Croatian diaspora. Interestingly, the little musicians speak English, but they all play and sing in Croatian. Now I would like to show you one of their rehearsals, which we attended during our Pittsburgh visit.
Odkud ide momče, pa viče djevojče.
And in the end, we would like to express our gratitude to the Central State Office for Croats Abroad, to Mrs. Mirjana Piskulic, head of the Sector for International Cultural Cooperation and European Affairs of the Ministry of Culture and Media, to the Croatian Fraternal Union in Pittsburgh, especially to the president of the Croatian Fraternal Union, Mr. Edward Pezo, and to all the members of Croatian Fraternal Unity, some of whom I must mention here, to Derek Hone, Ivan Beck, Janice Smargi. Last but not least, our gratitude goes especially to Mrs. Bernadette Lukatic-Sikaraš and Mrs. Darja Maroš, who were of great help and availability to all of us. Thank you for your attention.